Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching, and it's time for another crazy Death Guard kit bash on the channel today. Now, 3 boxes on the table here. The Stormhawk Interceptor isn't going to get used in this video, but it's going to be in a linked video fairly soon on the channel. I'm actually using spare parts from an Armiger kit, sort of torso you see in here, and a bloat drone kit. Now, I've built the 2 parts up to the kind of torso areas you see here. And then I'm taking all the spare parts of the bloat drone, which you do get quite a few, and then I'm going to be bolting them on effectively to that Armiger torso. Now I've got a spare Armiger torso because of a sort of crazy Space Marine kit bash I did a while ago where I used the Armiger legs to put onto a Space Marine turret. Quite a strange build that one was, again down in the Space Marine playlist on the channel, so you can have a look at that. So really it's an opportunity to use up spare parts from another kit and do something a little bit strange for the Death Guard. And my kind of concept is these are maybe an alternate creator that's making different versions of the bloat drone for the Death Guard army. Maybe they're an old version, maybe it's captured parts they're using, that kind of concept. So I've built the torso up there, as you saw there, and I've put the tendrils onto the bottom of the Armiger torso, but engines is a problem. I did have another concept for engines, which will be in another video later on for a different kind of kit bash. But I thought in this case I'd do some cast up engine parts. So I'm literally taking the engines from the bloat drone and using blue stuff to cast up these engine parts. Now I'm not going to go into massive detail about how to do blue stuff casting. I've done a video down below, I'll link so you can have a look at that. Now really this is just a method of literally taking any part really and casting it up. And I know at this point in any video, whenever I mention blue stuff casting, I start to show it, inevitably people will say, why don't you just buy a 3D printer? And they're probably not wrong. I enjoy this method though. It's fairly quick, it's fairly easy, although I do mess this first casting up, as I'll show you very shortly. And it's just that little bit of fun. And it doesn't involve, a huge investment of time. But if you're more interested in how to do blue stuff casts, obviously you can see what's going on in the background. I will link that video down below, so really do take a look. But it's just a fun little way of customising your miniatures. So again, yeah, I needed some engines for the, I suppose, Imperial bloat drone that we're about to do. So I've made some castings up of the engines, and I'm using a mix here of greenstuff and milliput, 2 of my favourite kind of moulding agents for doing sculpting and things with. And I find if you mix greenstuff and milliput together, it gives the best of both worlds. Greenstuff takes a bit more detail, is a bit more flexible and things, doesn't really have the rigidity. Milliput's a bit more rigid, a bit more solid, but it can be sort of a little bit brittle if you cast things out of it. So actually somewhere in between, it can be quite a useful mix. And the reason I wanted a bit of strength involved in it is these are quite fiddly moulds, let's say those words, and what I didn't want to do is have them breaking apart if it was milliput as I open the moulds up, and I didn't want too much flexibility in because they are quite a large piece. Now this is just showing you how I cast things. This is actually an old 18-pounder shell from a World War I battlefield tour I did about 20 years ago. Really good way of pressing the moulds down. Now just the reason I'm showing you all this piece is my first mouldings of these engines went wrong, relatively badly wrong. Didn't fill the moulds with enough milliput green stuff mix really, and it meant that a lot of detail got missed at the top part you see in here, and also some of the pieces didn't push together. Really just talking about this, saying look, when you're doing kit bashes, especially one like this where I had a plan but I didn't really have it 100% defined, things are going to go wrong, and kind of how you respond to that and how you sort of roll with those mistakes I think sometimes is just as important as sort of what you do when it goes right. So yes, first set of engines went horribly wrong. This next one is actually particularly bad, and then we'll move on to how I did it. You can see the look, bad moulding at the top, the actual spike there, fragile, wasn't pushed in enough, hadn't sort of sealed in. And that can just be one of those things that you're going to have to sort of live with doing these mouldings. Now, obviously this was over a course of a couple of days, fill a mould one evening, do some more of the kit bash, those kind of pieces. So it can be frustrating. It can be hours and hours of then, I suppose, recovery work, but stick with it and you'll be fine. Now, I did refill the moulds, and I decided I wasn't going to put the Chaos spikes on the model in the next set. And that was because as I was putting this, looking at the parts on the table, as you're working through the build, I decided I wanted this to represent more maybe a sort of part way to Chaos build, or that kind of concept that the Tech Marines, if that's what even Death Guard have, the Tech Marine type people that were building this kind of Chaos thing were using recovered Imperial parts. So it's kind of somewhere in between, kind of part Imperial, part Chaos. Now you might notice on the table there's a weird casting next to my water pot there of a bit of a Titan. Something whenever I'm doing stuff with milliput or green stuff, if I have any spare, I always throw that into an old mould for later parts. Right, so now we'll talk about how to fix the engines on this Armiger hull. Decided this armour plating that was sticking outside was going to get really in the way of the engines, so I trimmed that off, and that really is the only changes I've actually made to the Armiger torso. Just just kind of cutting these armour panels off, smoothing them down, and some little bits of tweaks around the nose there where you can see the tendrils kind of came through. Then I wanted to sort of get this engine slightly pushed away from the hull. So I've taken the mounting for the weapon that would sort of go in, but I've cut off and moved right down to the flat part, the actual spikes that hold the weapon, and glued that in almost as a plug into that kind of armature torso. Now it's onto the milliput, pure milliput this time. Started off by thinking, oh, it'll be quite neat and tidy around here for the plug to mount the engines. Completely changed my mind, and then thought, right, I'm going to actually have a really kind of mutated sections on this build. So bit of milliput and push that all over the model. Now what I'm using the milliput for in this instance is as kind of the mounting and sealing point for the engines that I'm pushing in. So literally when the milliput is in there, I'm just going to push the engine right through so that it's contacting with that plastic plug that I put in. So using the milliput when it dries solid, it sticks things to it, using that as really the mounting kind of point for these pieces. Now if you were doing something coming off the engines after this, you would want to do some pins or something a bit more solid, but in this case really good places to mount the engines. Now I'm going around really and kind of nurgling up or chaosing up lots of the models, taking milliput, pushing it into any gaps and cracks like here where the tendrils are, where I think it might need a bit more support. Now the best thing about the bloat drone is you get 3 different weapon options and all the mounting pieces for those weapons. Now I did on an which weapons to use, literally it was just a random pick, so I thought, right, what looks cool? So I went for rule of cool of these. I left the flame or plague belchers, I think they're called. That's another weapon option you could have. Didn't quite look as bulky and cool on the model. You'll see in the background there I've put the death roller onto the actual bloat drone model. So that is now all of the main parts of the kind of build done. I really went rule of cool when doing it, so I picked the bulky, interesting weapons, something to make it a little bit more nurgly. Didn't want to overburden the model though, because it's a fairly thin set of plastic that this is like hovering on the ground from, but it hasn't taken too much weight on. Some final details are some little kind of arm claw blades that got into there. Now these would originally glue into the torso, but again I've just pushed them into the milliput to seal in. Now it's for the Nurgle detailing on that milliput, because so far I've just literally pushed it onto the model in random patches, sort of Nurgle it up. Now what I'm putting on now is some little milliput and greenstuff balls that I made with excess milliput and greenstuff over the course of months really. I always have a little bag of these balls because it's a great way of Nurgling things up. And I've put a few of them just pushed into the milliput around here. Now for reference, this milliput's maybe half an hour old at this time, so it's still really workable, still got a bit of stickiness. And then to put detail in, it's as simple as going around with, I'm using a sculpting tool here, but it could be anything to sort of pointed end, and just prodding it into that milliput to make kind of a pitted, gross kind of effect all over that milliput areas, and that is literally it. Enough Nurgle detailing for coolness. You could start going with tentacles and all that kind of stuff, but I wanted to keep it fairly simple and fairly basic. Leave it to thoroughly dry, and then I thought I'd throw some battle damage on, because the actual armature torso looked a little bit too clean and tidy to be, you know, a Nurgle vehicle that's potentially being captured by the Death Guard. So a few bits of battle damage. You see there just with the pin drill and scraping out some battle damaged areas. You could go absolutely crazy with this, or you can keep it fairly simple, kind of like I had. Now, again, make it match your army, make it fit in. I've particularly like battle damage on Nurgle. I think it ages the vehicles quite nicely. It also gives you areas to paint kind of Nurgle's rock coming out of, you know, and put the things on later. So this is it, just while the base was drying. Did the basing slightly to match the rest of my army. If you've watched the channel, you'll know kind of what I go for. And let's have a look at kind of the painted models. I'm not going to show you how I painted them necessarily, because we'll skip straight to the painted miniatures, but just to show you that, and then you can check the rest of the channel out for painting guides. Here is the standard bloat drone, went with the death roll or flesh mower. Bit of blood effects, that kind of stuff on there. And here is the painted kitbashed armature / bloat drone. I really like it. I think it fits in quite well. Definitely seems like a stage between sort of Imperial and Death Guard technology. And I've got a slightly linked video coming up soon that is going to take this and run with it slightly Imperial based. Bit of painting to finish, but I think this is the finished article. Hope you liked that. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on the video.